The people that fund the projects. Okay, so we have a lot of developers, we have a lot of interest in the room. What I'm going to do today is just introduce you to accessibility. Sorry. All these people are waving at me, telling me things, so I got to concentrate here a little bit. Okay, I have a prepared presentation that I'm going to step through, but I really, really welcome you to ask questions as we go along and to contribute your perspective on accessibility and your experience as well. And I'm hoping that I can see you. The light's shining pretty brightly, so there's a few people up in the corner here that are a little bit hard to see, so speak up if I don't see you. So, web accessibility. I'm showing a picture right now from the London Olympics, where Tim Berners-Lee did a presentation, and what is posted is a saying that said, "This is for everyone." And this is the web. The web is for everyone. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. And that is a quote by Tim Berners-Lee, who actually invented the World Wide Web. And that's what we're working to today, to ensure that we understand accessibility and access to information through the web in the broadest possible lens. So why are we doing it? Demographics. In Ontario, approximately 1.85 people have a disability, inaccessibility, but really a big part of it has been the regulatory framework that is helping move this agenda a little bit along with a stick. So from a provincial perspective, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act is one of the primary drivers, and in particular, the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation, which has very specific requirements around information and communication. But just for all of you here who are based in Ontario and perhaps might be interested in the AODA, you might be getting the question, well, why do I have to do it here? Am I going to have to do it differently everywhere else? Why is Ontario the only place? Well, just to show you that these accessibility legislative frameworks are supported in other jurisdictions in other countries. In Canada, we have the Canadian Human Rights Code, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and Canada has signed on to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which states that access to information is a human right. In the United States, there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 508, and relatively new 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. All of these drivers are just some North American drivers that are supporting the accessibility initiatives around the world. So the Information and Communication Standard is part 2 of the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation. Has everybody heard about the AODA? Yeah. There's going to be a session this afternoon that speaks a bit more about it, but this is just essentially what the essence of this standard is, that it's necessary to provide information and communication in ways that are accessible for people with disabilities. You need to create, provide, and be able to receive. The goal is to receive information in an accessible manner that suits how you identify barriers wherever they are. Strive to remove those barriers, creating web experiences, websites, mobile applications that don't have barriers built into it. So, what's accessibility? Anybody having a couple words that they want to say about what accessibility means to you? Anybody? No? Yes? Simplicity of use? Inclusivity? Yes. Access to information. Wonderful. And love, and the band is OK Go. And so it's an instance where assistive technology is being applied in a situation that's creating a more inclusive, understandable experience for all of us. Autocorrect, probably hate it sometimes, very, very handy. In the early days, this again was assistive technology. It was word prediction, and it was a big deal to get something on the system. It was complicated. And now it's, again, just an inclusive practice. It's just how we use our technology. So accessibility really is about universal design. It can be about disability and impairment. Age-related, we are a continuum of abilities for each individual. Could be as assist with temporary conditions. You've broken your arm. You've been in an accident, for whatever reasons. It's about personalization. You have the opportunity to choose whatever device and wherever you want to work, and you need to customize that experience to yourself. It might be a situational disability where you're working in an environment where you have to be eyes-free. You have to listen to the clues that are coming out, or hands-free when you're working with your hands and you still need to interact with your devices. So here's an accessibility scenario, and I want all of you to think about it a little bit. You know, what might this scenario look like? Who is this user? Physical, one-handed control, limited dexterity. Vision, very limited viewing range. Cognitive, they have an attention deficit and distractibility. So have you all painted a picture? Here's your user. I'm showing a picture of somebody walking across the street, holding a mobile device, typing with one hand. So is this disability? Is this not disability? It is, again, how we all choose to interact with our devices. And this is a scenario that we have to consider in our inclusive design. So in general, we're talking about, from the legal perspective, quite often, and understanding disabilities, we talk about access for people with visual impairments, including people who are blind, low vision, have age-related vision loss or color blindness, hearing impairment, deafened or hard of hearing, mobility impairments, perhaps restrictions to using the mouse or the keyboard as a result of a spinal cord injury, cerebral palsy, carpal tunnel syndrome, fatigue, or cognitive impairments. Someone may have challenges with memory or problem solving as a result of a brain injury, or have a print disability and reading disability, or have difficulties with verbal comprehension. Some of the assistive technologies that people with disabilities use are things like a screen reader, where all the information on your website in your computer is actually read aloud to you using text-to-speech. There are text-to-speech devices that will read your text back to you. So perhaps if you have a learning disability, it might be easier to comprehend information by listening to it than by actually reading it. There's voice recognition, so you can interact with your computer without having to touch a keyboard or a mouse. Assistive listening devices. There's quite a wide range of assistive devices that are available. And you want to make sure that people who are using these alternative mechanisms for consuming your website are able to do so. But not everybody uses assistive technology. Some people will just use customized settings in their computers. So operating system tools like high contrast, larger fonts, changing their browser settings. My co-presenter, who actually can't make it here today, Steve Buell, the way that he uses the computer is he basically just adjusts through these internet options and browsers, makes the size of the print bigger, and makes all the menu items bigger. Oh, where'd it go? It's behaving. It's going all by itself here. Oh, hang on. My dragon has turned itself on. The ghost in the machine. So what are some of the common accessibility myths? There aren't many disabled people who use my website. We can't settle for a really boring site. That's the only thing you can do if it's accessible. It's got to be visual. It's got to be highly interactive, and I can't do that if I make it accessible. Accessibility is expensive, and it's really complicated. We've got a text-only version of this website. Or, you know, instead of using the website, why can't they just come into the office or use the phone? That's good enough. And one of the others is accessibility limits innovation. All of these, in my opinion, are myths. If you do accessibility right, if you are innovative, it's an opportunity to create really rich interactive sites that are appealing to a broad range of the population. So how do we make a website accessible? There are technical standards that can assist you with doing that. The key one that is also regulated in the AODA is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And In some ways, they're very complex, and in some ways, they're very, very simple. So this is not a technical discussion of what WCAG is. It's an introduction to the principles and ideas around accessibility. There are 4 primary principles, is that your website must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. In order to achieve that, they outline 12 guidelines, not a lot. Within those guidelines, there are approximately 65 success criteria, and it's a progressive level of accessibility. There are 3 levels of compliance. So level A is basic level, level AA, intermediate, level AAA is something to aspire to for the most accessible experience. And even though the regulation says start at A, I suggest that you push the bounds as far as you can understand everything that's possible, do whatever you can in order to achieve accessibility from the ground up. So basically, when we're looking at our website, we're talking about the content, the structure, how we present that information, and the behavior of everything that goes on the page. It deals with the language and educational levels, the information and readability of your websites, and wherever you're going to present it, whether it's web, whether it's a document, an e-text, telephony, those are the places where these standards and these principles will apply to create something more accessible. So the first principle is that it is perceivable. So you need to provide text alternatives for any non-text content. Wherever you have multimedia, you need to provide captions and other alternatives in order to be able to consume that media. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a few examples of where these guidelines or where these principles apply as we move on. Your website needs to be adaptable, meaning you should be able to present it in different ways. And assistive technology should be able to interpret the structure, the navigation, and the relationship of the information on your pages in a way that allows for comprehension and interactivity. It should be distinguishable. So you have to make sure that content is easier for users to see and hear. Any questions about Perceivable? No? Okay. Your website has to be operable. All functionality needs to be available from the keyboard. You can't assume that everybody's going to be able to use a mouse to click here or a keyboard to type information in. You want to assume that they can use a keyboard to navigate through your site. You have to give users enough time to read and use content. Don't use content that will create a seizure. Thank goodness the early days where everybody could make websites all flashy are over with, and now we're kind of past the woo-ha internet and more about let's just make this do what we want it to do. You have to be able to help users navigate, find content, and know where they are. So these principles, this is accessibility. They don't look that scary. They really are about good design, about the good user experience. So do we have any user experience designers here? All right, great. Do you want to just comment about whether these are unusual, unexpected, desirable? Thumbs up. So we have a thumbs up. So this is not news. Your website needs to be understandable and robust. Your text has to be readable. Your content has to appear and operate in predictable ways. If you click something, you should know what's going to happen before you click it. If you click something and something appears, you should be told something just showed up. And you have to help your users avoid and correct mistakes. So again, it's about good usability principles. This is what you want all your websites to do. And it has to be robust, well-coded, well thought out, well-structured, intelligent selection of the technologies that you're going to use to build this experience. And that's it. Now you know WCAG. Okay, so when I was doing my presentation, I thought, all right, there's a number of different ways to approach it. And I could do a presentation that says, all right, if you have a visual disability, this is what you do. You have mobility impairment, this is what you do. And what I want to do is to try and change how we think. We have to create an inclusive experience. Disability doesn't lie within the person. Somebody may have a visual impairment, physical impairment, that means that they interact with our environment in a different way. But really, if we create inclusive spaces, there's no disability there. There is the opportunity to interact and consume with everything. As soon as you create a barrier, that's when a disability and a handicap comes into place. And so instead of doing a presentation that says, okay, this is what you do for cognitive impairment, this is what you do for mobility impairment, I'm going to challenge some assumptions. And I'll end up going back and forth between, okay, really this is about, someone with a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, but really think about your assumptions when you're creating your website. All users will interact with my site by using a mouse and clicking, typing, using a keyboard. That's a truth. And was the truth for very many years, up until a few years ago, where all of a sudden, oh, you can use touch and you can use gesture now. So we're expanding our understandings of how people are going to use our site. So if you make those assumptions, that that's the only way that somebody's going to interact with the site, you are creating a barrier. So we have a picture of someone with a spinal cord injury that it has a microphone that is not only using voice recognition, which isn't perfect. I believe there's a presentation going on right now about Dragon, or in the next session, that's going to show you that it's not that easy to use voice recognition to control websites, especially if they're poorly done, but also using a mouse stick to type and to move, activate various devices. So what do you do to make your websites more accessible? I had a long conversation with someone that I worked with for very, very many years, someone I respect incredibly highly. She has a spinal cord injury and worked full-time. Half of her time she would be in the office, and half of the time she would be at home, lying in her bed so that she didn't end up having pressure sores. And in the early days, before technology, she would dictate everything into a microphone, but then control was out of her hands. She had to wait until somebody could type it up. She had no independent control over her work and was very, very reliant. Computers came in, yay. And so about 20 years ago, I worked with her and we put the first installation of voice recognition in. The software, Dragon Dictate, was $11,000. The computer was $10,000. And so that installation was leaps and bounds ahead, but really difficult because you couldn't speak in any sort of a natural tone. It was one voice at a time. So she's been, as she says, the bleeding edge, the painfully bleeding edge of using voice recognition all the way over the years, and especially as websites and the web became more mature. And a lot of her things that she talked about is really everything has to be keyboard accessible. I need to be able to tab between the fields. I need to know where I'm going, have a visible focus so that as I tab and I move my cursor, I can see where am I going and I can anticipate where I'm going to go next. A lot of websites that as you start tabbing between the fields, you think you're going down a row and then all of a sudden you're way off to the left. And then it jumps around to the bottom of the screen because whoever has created those input forms hasn't thought about the order and the structure of how somebody works. I know I'm a keyboard user. I like to move around by keyboard, and it drives me crazy when I watch my kids fill in a form, and they will type into a form, and they'll pick up their mouse, and they'll go and they'll click in the next field and type in the form. It's like, well, you can tab. And then as soon as I tell them you can tab, then all of a sudden I'll be on a website where it jumps all over the place, and they say, no, that's really annoying. I'm not doing that. Pick up my mouse, click in the field. Make your skip navigation link visible. Currently, you can, if you put a link at the top of your page, it'll skip past all the navigation to go to your main content area. That's a way that enables people with a visual impairment or who are using screen readers to skip over all the extra stuff and just get to the meat of what I want to know. Those are always hidden. And what if you're a keyboard user? You don't want to traverse all of that as well. Just take me where I want to go. Other things that once in a while, I've been doing this a long time, and even I'll forget. Sometimes security gets put into different input fields that you're not allowed to copy text into. Voice recognition is not always that easy, especially if you're typing non-standard phrases like passwords. How easy is it to say cap q ampersand slash 27, whatever your password is going to be. And so she'll store that someplace and type it in. But you can't copy into some of these input fields that are protected. Making your links sayable. If you have a link that is actually a URL and you look at it and you think, okay, yeah, where do I even start? How do I say this name of the link? And also trying to keep the screen simple. Using assistive technology adds a whole layer of complexity onto using your website that you sometimes, and assistive technology is great, but it has a long way to come. You have to do a lot of workarounds. You have to remember a lot of keystrokes. And sometimes you spend so much time trying to make your technology work that it's almost primary to trying to interact with the website. So the more complex your website is, the more difficult it can be. Okay, so here's a couple examples that my friend gave me and Steve gave me. Here's an example of a modal dialogue on Huffington Post, and that modal dialogue will appear on the screen. It is not accessible. It's the far left Huffington with the LinkedIn or the Twitter icon. That dialogue shows up on the screen. And if you're using a keyboard and you're not careful about how you create this, the focus doesn't go to that main area. And so as you're pressing tab, it actually cycles all the way down around the background. And eventually you can get to the back screen. There's a little X on the top corner. If I'm using voice recognition and I say close, I want it to close that dialogue. Close is going to shut my whole application. So let's say I'm halfway through an application form or I'm doing a purchase and all of a sudden one of these windows pops up and I want it to go away and I say close and poof, everything's gone. You have to start all over again. Another bugaboo is iframes. You will have two scroll bars. There's an input field and a scroll bar, and you'll have another scroll bar that is your browser scroll bar. When you're using voice recognition, you say page down. Scroll down. What am I scrolling? Am I scrolling the browser? Am I scrolling inside my little box? How do I get into my box? And so she's experienced a lot of work environments where it's really a big effort to get into that box to type what I have to type. Simple things that you can do from an accessibility perspective that'll not only for mobility impairments and using voice recognition, but also for somebody who uses a screen reader. There's a button here that says send now. It's actually a picture, and it has a picture of the word send now. In order to make that accessible, you add something called alternative text. And that's basically when you roll your mouse over, you'll see the little tooltip. And the alternative text that somebody has put on here is submit. Alt equals submit. If I'm a voice recognition user, I see and I say, I look at that button that says send now and I say send now. Nothing happens. Send now. You start yelling, you start getting frustrated. Why is this not working? And then have to use really complicated ways of move mouse left, move mouse down, faster, slower, move mouse right, stop, click. Very complicated, time-consuming process to activate that button. Why? Because that button, the person should be saying submit, because that's what the alt text is. So really simple design. If you have a word on your button, your alt text should match. Not highly technical, but makes a huge difference. Okay, here's an assumption. All visitors to my site will be able to hear the audio, see the video. They'll be able to start, stop, and play and control my video players. True. Absolutely true, as long as you think about how that experience can be. So what's accessible design? For your videos, ensure you have captions. One of the things that gets overlooked quite a bit is the media player that you choose. Make sure that that media player, first of all, you can get to it if you're using a keyboard. You can tab to it, and that each of the buttons are labeled so that you know that when you land on it, especially if you can't see, that you know that you're on the play button and not the close button or the stop button. Provide audio description for your videos. And if you have audio cues, Make on your site, a beep goes off that says that, you should do something. Also have a visual cue in case someone is unable to hear or perceive that cue. So some of the examples, again, from an inclusive design perspective, where do captions help? They help people who are learning a second language, someone with a learning disability that likes to hear and see at the same time and has enhanced focus on what they're working on. Someone who has difficulties with an accent. I mean, I know, a lot of the deep South American programs, they'll have somebody speaking with a heavy, heavy accent and they caption it so that English speakers can actually understand that dialect of English. To watch content in a noisy setting, in a bar, while having your pedicure done, wherever, captioning is being used very widely so that we can consume it depending on our situational disability. And I did a presentation with somebody, and one of the people in the audience afterwards came, and he had a hearing impairment, and he says, you forgot something that's really important about captioning. I said, okay, I thought I captured most stuff. He says, no, you missed a really important one. Captioning can help your marriage. I said, what? He says, well, what if you want to watch TV at night in your bed and your partner doesn't want to? You get to still watch TV and not bother them. I said, okay, cool. I got to put that in here. You can also have searchable transcripts. Okay, now I'm not talking a lot about the AODA here, but going beyond, and I better speed up, beyond requirements. This deck will probably be available somewhere, I'm not sure, and I encourage you to click on these links. You can actually create a sign language version of your website. And if you click on these links when you get the deck, you'll see that. I've given an example of what an audio description sounds like in a video. Okay, here's an assumption again. All users acquire, organize, and retain information in the same way. All my users are web savvy, they're literate, they can quickly scan and find the important stuff. I know I've got all this flashy stuff on the side, these extra toolbars, these little pop-up windows, but my users, the ones that are coming to my site, they can ignore all that and just get to what I want them to do, the primary reason for my site. Everybody's got a good memory, so if I'm in the middle of a 6-step process, they'll remember what they picked on screen 1, and that everybody can operate the computer at the same speed. These are all assumptions that if you follow those assumptions, you're going to create barriers for people that perhaps have a cognitive impairment due to fatigue, a learning disability, dyslexia, pain. You may not have a lot of time to work on your websites. You don't want to deal with all the extras. You have enough energy to get through your primary task. You don't want to have to deal with all that other stuff that gets in the way of you working. Stress and anxiety. A lot more of our services, our access to justice, access to health care is all going online. And access to education. The more complex those sites are, the more difficult it is to navigate through that. You're going to increase the stress and anxiety of somebody working through that, or if somebody has a mental health disability, that might be difficult to surmount in order to get to the end of the task. So what do you do around creating a more accessible experience for someone with a cognitive impairment? First of all, structure your content well. Needs to be organized. What's the primary purpose of that website? Make it clear. What's your subheadings? Focus your content. Avoid distractions in the content, the type of content that you're devising, and ensure that it's clear what this site is about and where you're going to go next. An accessible site is a site that is visually rich and highly interactive. And if you start looking at removing those visual cues in order to be accessible for somebody who's blind, you're cutting out a huge part of your user base and a huge number of people with disabilities that really use of vision, visual cues, use of color, careful constructs in terms of your layout is really going to enable them to comprehend and interact with your website in a more accessible way. Provide multiple ways of presenting a similar information, especially if it's complex information. Avoid using all caps and underlining your text, with the exception of your links. You want to be able to find your links pretty easily. Avoid using sans serif fonts. If someone has a learning disability, sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate print because the serifs, people know what serifs are? There's those little curly cues at the bottom of your letters. They can run into another, and so it'll make it difficult to figure out, am I seeing an I or a T or an O? And so try and use sans serif fonts on your websites. Avoid moving texts and the very distracting things, especially if someone has attention deficit disorder. And set expectations for multiple steps. In advance, say to somebody, this is what you're doing. In order to get to the end of the task, it's going to take 4 or 5 steps. Here's an example of something that we did at Scotiabank for an online banking application. It's clear there's 4 steps. There's a color indicator that says this is our first step. There's text that actually says step 1 of 4, and it tells you what you're doing, personal information. And so your expectation is set in advance. You know approximately how long it's going to take and how much effort it's going to take and where you are all the time. So those sort of things can enhance accessibility not only for someone with a cognitive disability, but also someone with a visual impairment or screen reader users. Simplify. Mobile is very, very helpful. Or responsive design, if you think about it. Some people, the simplified interface of a mobile environment strips out all of that extra stuff and extra information and takes you to the basic functionality of your website. And so that responsive idea of keeping a really simple menu can not only makes it more accessible on your mobile device, but will probably make it more accessible for someone with a learning disability. I worked with a woman for many years who needed to have all that extra information removed when she had her calendar. She was a lawyer, and she had her assistant type every address out on a separate page with white spaces all in between so that she could consume just that piece of information and not be distracted by everything else in a calendar or a date book. And when the Palm Pilot came out and she discovered that you could have a calendar or a contact that showed one information at a time, she was sold instantly. All that paper disappeared and the effects of her learning disability disappeared. Assumption. All my users perceive content on my site in the same way. They can see it, they can hear it, they can appreciate the colors on the site. I'm showing a couple of color indicators. Click on the red button. What if you're colorblind? Red means nothing. I can't remember, I think 8% of men are colorblind. And so if you're relying on color cues, then you are eliminating those people from interacting with your site. So accessible design. Steve shared this example with me. He increases the size of the fonts on his screen through not only the operating system, but the browser. And he's constantly running up against websites where print gets squished. I'm showing a calendar that because of the way he's not using assistive technology, he's just using browser settings, that all the numbers have become squished because of how the site has been designed. They're overflowing the area that has been allotted for that number to show up in. Ensure that you have high contrast on your websites. Provide audio description for any video that is going on in actions. All your form field labels. Visually, you can usually see name, and then you have an input field, and that's pretty clear. But if you're designing your websites for someone who is using a screen reader or a large print software, they may not see that visual association between the name and the input field. Make sure you code it in the background, and WCAG gives you very specific tips and technical techniques on how to do that. Whenever you make a screen change, bring focus there immediately. So if somebody is magnifying their screen at 8 times, it's like a little viewport into their window. They may only be looking at a top corner that's an eighth of your entire screen, and you have a pop-up that is showing up somewhere in the middle of the screen. They may never find it. They may not know that that's happening. But in your code, if you control the focus, it takes you right there. It's like, oh, there, I got to do something. I got to click something here. Don't use images of text whenever possible. Just use text. I have a word up there. Kind of says university, but doesn't really. If you're making your print bigger, that pixelates and disappears. If you're creating a table, visually you've got a structure. So you want to make sure that it's coded correctly. So the last little piece I want to do is give you a very quick demo. Any questions just while I set up? Comments? Oh, assistive technology is can be very expensive. What's happening, though, is a lot of assistive technology is starting to be built into operating systems. And so it's becoming free. Like there's a Zoom feature on in Windows and Mac OS, and there's screen readers also built in. Okay. Let me see. JAWS is a screen reader. It's about $1,000. Zoom Text is print magnifier. It's about $700, so it's quite expensive. There's a free version of a screen reader called NVDA. Okay. Let me go back to concentrating. If you ever want to take a look at a really great site, it's the Web Accessibility Initiative has a before and after accessibility page, and it'll point out to you 2 pages that look pretty much the same. One's accessible, what's not accessible, and it'll highlight for you why one is and why one isn't, and give you some guidance as to how you can make your sites more accessible. So hopefully this will work here, and this will be just my little screen reader demonstration. Well, screen reader large print. Okay, the audio is not playing, so hang on.
Accessible, home, wave, Zoom text user interface, settings, reader, app RDR.
Okay, I'm just going to have you listen to some text.
Heat wave linked to temperatures. After 3 years of effort, city scientists now agree that the primary cause of the 2003 heat wave was hot air from heat wave. Full story. Man gets 9 months in violent case.
Okay, that's not going to work. All right.
Zoom text user.
Sorry.
Welcome to City Lights.
Do you know what happened to the screen?
Accessible home page dash Mozilla Firefox.
Sorry, I've lost the screen. Okay, I had a website that I just wanted to show you how the text was being read. And basically, because it wasn't coded correctly, all the information that was on that page was being read as kind of gobbledygook. That basically, the text, instead of reading after 3 years of effort, or heat wave linked to temperatures, after 3 years of effort, city scientists agree the primary cause of the heat wave was hot air. And if the way the text was read was actually that it was quite gobbledygook. But unfortunately, technical problems, my demo doesn't work. Okay, I think it was Zoom Text actually. Killed it. So what can you do as As users, speak up, provide feedback, talk about your accessible and inaccessible experiences, get technical. Be the people that are the ones that are designing the technology of the future to be inclusive. As designers, make sure your navigation, your structure, your images are designed correctly. Website owners, put money in the budget, make accessibility a priority, start your projects accessible from the beginning. And remember, equal rights are not special rights. And Steve asked me specifically if I could just leave one more word with you. The disability is not the barrier. Are you? Anyway, that's the end of my presentation on Intro to Accessibility. Any questions? It's the Web Accessibility Initiative, before and after demo. Any other? Yes?
Just for myself as a person, you know, when I'm out and about, I've noticed that in the public, there isn't a lot of accessible information that's provided to me, and I'm wondering how or where I can find these devices, such as what we talked about. If I want to, you know, let's say go to a workshop, but, you know, when I plan to do that last minute, I don't give them notice that they can't book me. Therefore, it's not accessible to me. So, is there any devices or advice that you have about that? How do they make things accessible when there isn't that notice given?
It's a really, really tough issue. I think that as the chat facilities and instant messaging start to become more mature, then there's probably an increased opportunity to just use the devices that are there to type and get information. I'm hoping eventually that video remote interpretation will be more available.
Yes, and where, right?
I don't know.
I don't see it here. I mean, there's developers in Blue. Are they developing it?
It's a good question. You have to keep asking and telling people that you need better interactions. Anybody that's designing web conferencing systems, telecommunications systems, currently they are really large barriers to people who are deaf and are hard of hearing. What's my favorite application? Oh. Yeah, I don't have a lot of good examples right now. I think there's, you have to ask around other people. My problem is whenever I go to a website, it's like, okay, they didn't do that and they need to fix that. I think that there's a lot of websites that are getting quite good. The BBC website is quite good. The Canadian government has revamped a lot of their websites. They're good from an accessibility perspective. That was as a result of a lawsuit by Donna Joden, and there are people that are doing presentations on the Canadian government website experience. And a lot of the consultants that are working here from DQ, from Simply Accessible, Paciello, they are also part of creating really great accessible websites for their customers. And you could also ask them and say, tell me a project that you're most proud of. And I will give a little bit of a plug. The Scotiabank.com website is pretty good too. Anything else? Yes? Yes. If you comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, then your website will be considered accessible. And there are quite a number of tools that are out there that can help you test for that from an accessibility perspective. I'm not sure if there's any presentations here today on that, but some of them are available for free. The Inclusive Design Resource Center has a product called AChecker, and it's at achecker.ca. If you plug in your URL on that website, it'll run through and tell you how close to compliance with WCAG you are. And DQ is another vendor upstairs that has a product that will do accessibility testing for you. So you have a wide range of testing tools. Yes? So the question is, what is the government going to use as a metric to decide whether your website is accessible or not? Are they going to expect you to go into AChecker, test your site, and send a report? Pretty much that's the question. The answer, I don't know. Haven't heard. Well, I don't want to keep you from lunch. I want to thank you all very much for attending the session. And if you have any questions, you can find me or anybody else, the vendors about accessibility.